Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, May 19th, day 226 of the war with Hamas. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emmanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Amanda.
Manny will share with us what we know about the operation late last week in Gaza that brought back 4 bodies of Israelis who were killed on October 7th and the remains taken by Hamas as bargaining chips. We will get a sense of the current situation in the Strip and in the north, even as the deaths of 2 more soldiers were announced already this morning. We'll also hear about the rare West Bank airstrike that killed a terrorist involved in a 2023 murder of an Israeli. All this and more when we're back. Last night, the IDF announced that soldiers had recovered the body of an additional hostage from the Gaza Strip after the announcement the previous day, on Friday, that 3 slain captives had been returned in a special mission. Manny, I know that a lot of the details are still under wraps, but what can you tell us about the mission that brought back the remains of Ron Binyamin, Amit Buskila, Yitzhak Geller-Renter, and Shani Luk?
So what we can say is that all 4 of these hostages were all killed in the same location on the morning of October 7th, near Mefal Sim. From there, their bodies were then kidnapped to the northern Gaza area. And that is where they were returned from. That is as much as we can say right now, because troops are still operating in the area. So the army does not want to release additional information as to where exactly or how exactly it recovered them. But all 4 were found in the same location. They were all returned in a special operation on Thursday night or overnight Thursday to Friday, with some of them being identified in the morning hours of Friday. The last one, Ron Binyamin, was identified later, and that's why the announcement was separate. I will note that the army didn't really plan to release this information initially because of the operation being ongoing. So they wanted to wait, but there was rumors spreading on social media, and they decided that they would be able to release at least the names of some of them, of these 4 that had been recovered.
Now, aside from Shani Luk, we were unaware that the other 3 had been killed on October 7th. And how can the army be so sure that they indeed were?
It is correct that Shani Luk was confirmed dead in late October. There was a piece of her skull that was identified in Israel, and based on that, they were able to determine that she had indeed died on the morning of October 7th. We do know that from other information that was available to the army that both Buskila and Itzik were at least wounded on the morning of October 7th. So there was a phone call that I think Amit Buskila made to one of her relatives saying how she had been shot. And I think similarly, the army had information as well on Geller-Renter as well, that he was wounded. And based on that information and based on the bodies that they had recovered and the initial forensic review that was carried out, they're able to confirm that they were all fatally wounded on the morning of October 7th. Whether or not they died in Israel or whether they died on the way to Gaza, I don't think it matters too much. What we do know is for a fact that they weren't killed while they were in Gaza by Hamas later on, or in an Israeli airstrike, which I should note has happened during the war. Some of the hostages have indeed been killed because of the ongoing battles. So in this case, they were all killed on October 7th.
This morning, the IDF announced the deaths of 2 soldiers that were killed during fighting in southern Gaza Strip. Yesterday, the slain troops were named as Staff Sergeant Nachman Meir Chaim Vaknin from Eilat and Staff Sergeant Noam Bitan from Yad Rambam, and they both served in the Givati Brigade's reconnaissance unit. So let's talk about the fighting in Gaza right now. Let's start from the north and move south, actually.
So in the northern Gaza Strip, there is an ongoing operation against Hamas in the Jabalia area. The Jabalia area we've talked about months ago. The army went in there in the beginning of the ground offensive, claimed to have dismantled Hamas's fighting force there, and is now going back in with probably as many troops, maybe slightly less, but a large amount of troops have gone into Jabalia. The army is explaining it as a operation against Hamas in areas that it didn't operate. So there's sort of neighborhoods deep within Jabalia that the army did not reach during the initial ground offensive. And because of that, it is now, I wouldn't say going back into those areas, but going in there for the first time, as well as areas surrounding it, which it had operated in. The fighting there deep within Jabalia is being described by some of the officers who are involved in the fighting as some of the most violent and the most intensive battles amid the war. And these are commanders who had fought in other areas of the Gaza Strip. There's a massive amount of RPG fire against the tanks, very, very intensive battles that are ongoing there. And then in central Gaza, there is still the ongoing operations in the Netzarim corridor, where troops are securing this corridor, which is used by the army to launch raids into other areas. And also, this is the location where the Americans' floating pier is located. So on Saturday, the first aid was brought in via this pier. I think more than 300 pallets of aid. And there's an entire IDF brigade which is securing that area, securing the pier, because American troops are not being deployed to Gaza. They're only on the pier itself. And then in the south, we're seeing the operation in Rafah. It's still sort of limited in scope. It's in the eastern part of Rafah, near the crossing with Egypt, which is still closed. And there are raids that are ongoing in those areas against Hamas sites. There's been hundreds of Hamas sites that have been destroyed, rocket launching positions that they've located, some of them that were primed for attacks, some of them that had just been used in attacks, and tunnels as well have been located. The army has been very, I would say, a bit secretive about the tunnels that they found in Rafah so far. They haven't really detailed much information about these tunnels, but I will note that in the ICJ hearing on Friday, the Israeli representative said that he said quite a large number of them cross into Egypt. I haven't heard this from the army yet. It's something that we'll probably hear soon, and it does not surprise anyone in Israel that Hamas has such tunnels crossing into Egypt.
So that actually answers a question as I was about to ask you, which is, how is it possible that Hamas still has so much munitions, so RPGs and all the weaponry that they're still using, the bullets? How are they still arming themselves?
I think the army believes that Hamas is not managing to build new weaponry amid the war. They're not managing to manufacture more rockets. I think they just have quite a large stockpile. We know that on October 7th and in the following days and weeks, they launched thousands and thousands of rockets. But after that, they slowed down significantly, only launching a handful at a time. So when we see the army moving into an area, I'll take Jabalia as an example. When the army pushed in there recently, all of a sudden there's loads of rocket attacks on Sderot, which is very close to Jabalia. And that is because the army's moving in. They got to get rid of all their stockpiles that are there before the IDF reaches them. And similar in Rafah, when the army pushed into Rafah initially a week ago, suddenly there was 3 separate barrages on Beersheba in southern Israel, where I live. So it's a pattern that we're seeing. Hamas still have rockets. Hard to say how many. Many of them are probably hidden underground. But when the army pushes in, then it suddenly launches them. And then once the army controls the area, we see that there are no more rocket attacks coming from those areas.
But not even rockets. I'm talking also about what they're using against the soldiers while fighting on the ground.
It's really hard to quantify exactly how many RPGs they have. It's mostly RPGs, I would say. Hamas, during the fighting, doesn't really shoot at soldiers that much. There's only been really a few cases where soldiers have been hit by gunfire. It's mostly Hamas launching RPGs, anti-tank missiles, setting up explosives, booby-trapping buildings. The 2 soldiers who were killed yesterday were killed by an explosive in a tunnel shaft. They were inspecting the tunnel shaft and it exploded on them. That is the main sort of method that Hamas operates in. They don't really face Israeli soldiers directly. It's shoot an RPG, run back into a tunnel or into a building, and that's how they are managing to continue fighting.
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. Let's turn to the north of the country, where the Israeli military on Friday confirmed carrying out an airstrike in eastern Lebanon, close to the border with Syria, killing a top al-Jama'ah al-Ismailiyah operative who worked alongside Hamas. Now, the IDF said that the drone strike targeted this person. And I want to first talk about how widespread Hamas is in the north. The group has obviously shot several barrages of rockets over the years. So how active is Hamas in the north now?
I would say very active. Since October 7th, Hamas has carried out a few dozen rocket attacks from Lebanon, mostly on the western side, so toward the Nahariya area. They've carried out rocket barrages because the Hamas stronghold in Lebanon is in the Tyre area, which is on the coast of Lebanon. They're based out of there. They established themselves more than a decade ago. They've just been operating there, but they haven't really carried out many attacks until about last year. They carried out a rocket barrage and actually claimed for it. And then during the war, of course, they've carried out many of these attacks, and you know, they're allied with Hezbollah. They carry out attacks alongside them. They're also allied with other groups like Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyah, or Islamic Group in English. It's a Lebanese organization. They have a military wing, and they also have a political side as well. And this top officer, this guy by the name of Sharhabil Sayed, Hamas claimed him as a commander in Hamas, that is, although the army disputes this and says he's part of the other organization. Regardless, they're both Hezbollah allies. Both organizations have carried out attacks against Israel during the war, launching rockets, even attempting an infiltration at one point. So we're seeing that Hezbollah has these allies, and I think there is something interesting that the attacks that have been attempted infiltration attacks on the border have actually not been carried out by Hezbollah, but rather by their allied groups, Hamas or Al-Jama'ah Islamiyah, or even Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I think it's a way of Hezbollah sort of distancing itself from operations on the border itself.
That is really interesting. But at the same time, it sounds like Israel, in terms of the bad guys in the north, they consider Hezbollah in charge, just like Hamas is in charge of the Gaza Strip, even though there are other terrorist organizations. Would you agree? I
would, yeah. So Hezbollah sites repeatedly get targeted in response to attacks, even if they're carried out by Hamas. In this case, the target was someone who was not part of Hamas, and there have been a few strikes that the army has publicly said that these targeted sites belonging to Hamas or sites belonging to Al-Jama'ah Islamiyah rather than just Hezbollah, but they're sort of lumped together. They're all allied with Hezbollah. They all carry out attacks with Hezbollah's approval or even in coordination. We've also seen Hamas members and Islamic Jihad members announced dead after a strike on a Hezbollah position. So they're all kind of mixing together and all working together on the northern border. So it doesn't matter all that much, really.
So I know pretty much every time we speak, we talk about an escalation in the north, and it seems like we can talk about that now as well. Would you say that you're seeing more strikes, more drones, more in general coming through?
I don't think it's specifically more, but the attacks that Hezbollah have carried out recently mark an escalation. They've been using sort of means that they hadn't used before, new technology, I would say. So it began with this drone strike deep within Israel. Last week, there was a drone that flew 35 kilometers into Israel, struck a very sensitive military facility near Tveria. It's the site from which a Israeli missile detecting balloon is operated from. The balloon is it's more of a blimp, I would say. It's not really operational. It was on the ground at the time, and this strike hit the facility. The damage is being assessed by the army, and it marked Hezbollah's deepest strike in Israel, drone strike within Israel amid the war, and possibly ever, this attack. And then a couple days later, Hezbollah carried out another attack on the border, targeting a military position in Metula. But it wasn't the usual explosive-laden drone where the drone flies down and crashes and explodes. This drone actually had rockets attached to it that were released from the drone. So it basically launched these rockets at the military position, and then the drone crashed and exploded. So Hezbollah are sort of bringing in new tools into the mix, carrying out strikes deeper in Israel, and that, I think, marks more of an escalation. The amount of attacks is relatively the same.
And we also discovered, I believe, that Hezbollah has anti-aircraft capability.
That is right. So it has been known by Israel that Hezbollah have these anti-aircraft capabilities. What is interesting is we didn't know exactly what systems they had, and one of the strikes a few days ago targeted what the army said was facilities used by Hezbollah's anti-aircraft or air defense unit. And footage circulating on social media showed the aftermath of one of these strikes, and you could see in the clip an Iranian Sayad 2 missile. It's a surface-to-air missile, relatively advanced capability. Publicly, it was not known that Hezbollah had these capabilities. Obviously, the army knew this, otherwise they wouldn't have targeted this specific site. But it does show that Iran has provided Hezbollah with more advanced capabilities. During the war, Hezbollah have shot down several Israeli drones, possibly using these systems, and it is definitely something that Israel needs to be aware of if it wants to operate in Lebanon and not have its aircraft shot down.
Let's turn our gaze to the West Bank. And an Israeli airstrike in the city of Jenin late Friday targeted a command room belonging to a local terror network and killed a terrorist behind the murder of an Israeli in May 2023. We first saw an uptick in aerial drone strikes in the West Bank. I think it was in July, if I remember properly, but I don't remember ever hearing about the use of a fighter jet. So this seems, I don't know if it's unprecedented, but it's really rare, isn't it?
It is very rare to see a strike carried out by a fighter jet in the West Bank. It is not the first. There was one carried out, I won't say when, because I don't think it was published, but it's not the first one. But it is definitely rare. Most of the drone strikes, and there's been dozens of them, carried out by drones. This attack, according to the IDF, was also carried out by attack helicopters, not just fighter jets. And it targeted this command center or command room operated by the local terror network in Jenin. It's the Jenin Battalion. It's sort of affiliated with Islamic Jihad. And at least one person who was killed in this attack is Islam Hamesa, who is an Islamic Jihad terrorist. He's wanted over his involvement in several attacks, including the killing of Mayor Tamari, the attack near Hermesh, I think was in May 2023, and then there was another attack in June 2023 that wounded 4 soldiers and 1 civilian. Those 2 attacks were carried out by the same cell, and they essentially managed to flee both attacks without being caught or killed or arrested since then. And now we're seeing that one of the terrorists who was involved in the attack was killed. A few months ago, there was a drone strike also in the Jenin area that targeted and killed at least one more member of this cell. I don't know exactly how many members of this cell there were, but several people were involved, several terrorists were involved in this attack, and now one more person who was involved is killed.
Why do you think that they deployed so many aircraft for this particular strike?
If I had to sort of assess why they used a fighter jets can carry bigger bombs and target sort of sites that are more protected in a way. So this command room may have been located at the bottom of a building or maybe in a basement area. A drone strike is a very small, relatively small munition. It's good for carrying out strikes on vehicles rather than on buildings, the size of the munition. So if they're using a fighter jet, and I think footage that I was able to see from both Palestinian media and from what the IDF released, several missiles were launched at this building. To me, that indicates that this command room may have been located one floor underground in a basement, possibly, or even just on a ground floor. And because it's a several-story building, you need a big munition to basically target those who are inside.
Manny, thank you so much for joining me today and for all of your updates and insights.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode has been produced by the Podwaves. If you have any comments or questions about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.